It was one of those hot summer nights when the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the first floor. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. That night, my mom had left the window in her room open to let in some fresh air. The window was right behind the bed, above the headboard. I woke up in the middle of the night and sat up. In the doorway of my mom's room, our cat was sitting, which was strange because he usually slept with us. As I watched him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to wake my mom, and in the 3 or 4 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up at the doorway. There was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. My mother, without hesitation, picked me up and literally threw me out of the screen window. We were on the first floor, and the drop was only about 3 feet. She quickly followed, and we started screaming for help. Someone called 911. The police arrived quickly but found no signs of forced entry. The only thing they discovered was that our front door was unlocked, leading them to believe the man must have exited that way. My mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened the water heater closet. Inside, she found a notebook with names and drawings, a pair of gloves, and some gum wrappers. She called the police again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. The notebook was particularly chilling. It contained names my mom didn't recognize and strange drawings that looked like maps or diagrams. The gloves were old and worn, and the gum wrappers were from different brands, indicating that the man had spent a considerable amount of time in the closet. The police took the notebook and gloves for analysis, but the results didn't provide any clarity. My mom became even more cautious, always checking the locks and windows before bed. But the fear remained, and every night I woke up at the slightest noise, terrified that the man would return. My mom decided we needed to move. She found a new apartment in a different neighborhood, and we started packing our things. While packing, I found an old box of photographs. In one of them, my mom was with a man I didn't recognize. I asked her who he was, and she said he was an old friend she hadn't spoken to in a long time. But something in her voice made me suspicious. I decided to ask her more about it, and she confessed that the man was her ex-boyfriend from long before she met my dad. She said he was strange and obsessive and that after they broke up, he tried to get her back several times. I began to suspect that this man might have something to do with the nighttime incident. My mom brushed off my suspicions, but I could see she was worried too. We moved to the new apartment, but the fear lingered. The new apartment was bigger and brighter, but I still felt uneasy. My mom tried to act calm, but I could see she was tense. We met our new neighbors, and one of them, Mrs. Johnson, was a very friendly old lady. She often invited us over for tea and told stories about her youth. One day, while we were having tea at Mrs. Johnson's, she mentioned that strange things had happened in our neighborhood. She told us about a man named Thomas who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances several years ago. He was known for his obsession and strange behavior. My mom turned pale when she heard the name. She asked Mrs. Johnson if she knew what had happened to Thomas, but the old lady just shook her head and said no one knew. My mom became even more vigilant, and I realized that Thomas was the man from the photograph. My mom decided we needed to find out more about Thomas. She started asking the neighbors and even found old newspapers that mentioned his name. It turned out that Thomas was a suspect in several cases of burglary and stalking, but he was never caught. We found the address of his last known residence and decided to go there. The house was old and abandoned, but we went inside anyway. Inside, it was dark and dusty, but we found a room that seemed to be his bedroom. On the table was another notebook, similar to the one we found in our closet. It contained the same names and drawings, as well as several photographs of my mom. We realized that Thomas had been watching us all this time. We returned home, and my mom decided to go to the police with the new evidence. But before we could do that, something unexpected happened. One night, as we were sleeping, I woke up to a noise. This time, I didn't wake my mom but quietly got up and went into the hallway. There, in the darkness, stood a man. It was Thomas. He looked at me, and there was something terrifying in his eyes. I screamed, and my mom woke up instantly. She rushed into the hallway and saw Thomas. He tried to grab her, but she managed to dodge and grab the phone to call the police. The police arrived quickly, and this time they caught Thomas. It turned out he had been hiding in our neighborhood, watching us. He was arrested, and my mom finally breathed a sigh of relief. After Thomas's arrest, we felt safe again. My mom became calmer, and I started sleeping better. We decided to stay in the new apartment, and over time, the fear began to fade. Mrs. Johnson continued to invite us over for tea, and we often sat with her, listening to her stories. She became like a grandmother to us, and we were glad to have such a friend. Years passed, and I grew up. I went to school and started making new friends. My mom found a job she loved, and we started living a full life. But sometimes, when I go to bed, I remember that night and realize that the fear will never completely go away. One day, when I was already a teenager, my mom decided to tell me the whole truth about Thomas. She confessed that he was her first love, but his obsession and strange behavior made her break up with him. She said he was always jealous and controlling, and after they broke up, he couldn't accept that she had found someone else. My mom told me that Thomas had tried to get her back several times, but she always refused. He started following her, and one day she found a threatening note in her bag. She went to the police, but they couldn't do anything without evidence. Now that Thomas was in jail, my mom felt free. She said she would never stop being grateful that we survived that night. I graduated from high school and went to college. My mom was proud of me, and I was glad I could make her happy. We continued to live in the same apartment, and Mrs. Johnson remained our close friend. One day, when I came home for the holidays, my mom said she had a surprise for me. She introduced me to a man named John, who would become her new friend. They looked happy together, and I was glad for my mom. The past was behind us, and we started a new chapter in our lives. But I will always remember that night and how my mom saved me. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is hope for a brighter future. Years went by, and I became an adult. I found a job I loved and met a girl I fell in love with. My mom and John got married, and we became one big family. Mrs. Johnson passed away, but we will always remember her kindness and wisdom. Sometimes I think about that night and how fragile life can be. But I also understand that it's these trials that make us stronger. My mom taught me to be brave and never give up, and I will always be grateful to her for that. Now, when I look at my family, I see how far we've come. We've been through fear and pain, but we found the strength to move forward. And that's what matters most. In the late 80s/early 90s, life in small Texas towns was simple and predictable. Everyone knew everyone, and the community was tightly knit. The town of Meadow Grove was no exception. Nestled in the heart of West Texas, Meadow Grove was a place where the desert's harsh beauty was a constant backdrop to daily life. The townsfolk were used to the scorching summers and the surprisingly cold winters, but they were not prepared for the chilling events that would unfold one winter night. I was around 6 to 7 years old at the time, and my sister, Emily, was 14 to 15. Our parents often left us home alone, trusting Emily to take care of me. Despite the age gap, we got along well. Emily was responsible and mature for her age, and I looked up to her. Our evenings were usually spent watching TV or playing games, but this particular night would be etched in our memories forever. It was about 8 p.m., and the winter chill had settled over Meadow Grove. The desert night was dark and quiet, except for the occasional howl of the wind. Emily and I were in the common room, watching one of those hour-long news specials on CBS. These shows often delved into gritty topics like trafficking, murders, and kidnappings, and tonight's episode was no different. The story was about a quiet, unassuming man who had gone on a rampage in his neighbor's house. He had mutilated the family and kidnapped their young daughter. The details were gruesome, and the manhunt for the perpetrator was still ongoing. The show was eerie, and the dimly lit common room added to the unsettling atmosphere. Our common room had a large glass door leading to the backyard, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows. Beyond the glass, there was nothing but darkness, as we hadn't turned on the backlight. The front door was on the other side of the room, with a small entryway. It was a solid door, but it had a glass storm door on the outside. About 45 minutes into the show, the narrator was discussing the ongoing manhunt for the crazed man. Suddenly, a loud banging echoed through the room. Bam! 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 Someone was pounding on the front door. Emily and I jumped up, screaming in terror. The room fell silent, except for the sound of our racing hearts. We tried to rationalize the noise, thinking it might have been something on the porch blowing against the door. West Texas was known for its strong winds, and we had planters in a rocking chair outside. But as we stood there, frozen in fear, we heard the storm door on the outside of our front door close. Someone had to have opened it to bang on the front door. Emily crawled over to the TV and turned it off with a loud thunk. The room was now dimly lit by the kitchen light down the hall. We exchanged terrified glances, our eyes darting between each other and the front door. Time seemed to stand still as we waited, holding our breath. I was on my knees, sitting on my feet, when I turned around to look at the back wall of windows and the glass door. Suddenly, we heard the back door knob turn. It was locked on the knob but not dead-bolted. The knob rattled slightly, as if someone was gently trying the handle. Neither of us made a sound, our breaths held in our throats. Then, the banging started again. Bam! 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 Someone was trying to force the door open, jerking it back and forth violently. The entire wall of windows vibrated, and I could see my reflection becoming fuzzy and then clear with each jerk of the door. Emily screamed, a blood-curdling sound that echoed through the house. She grabbed me and dragged me into her bedroom, slamming the door behind us. She quickly threw her mattress and anything else she could find in front of the door, creating a makeshift barricade. Thankfully, she had remembered to bring the phone with her, one of those heavy beige plastic phones with a long metal antenna. In her panic, Emily couldn't remember the sheriff's number. She hit redial on the phone, and it connected to one of her friends. Between broken gasps, she managed to convey that someone was trying to get into our house and that we needed help immediately. I was curled up on the floor, shaking uncontrollably, as Emily pleaded for her friend to come as quickly as possible. The minutes felt like hours as we waited, huddled together in the darkness. Finally, we saw the headlights of a car pulling up to the house. It was Emily's friend and her parents. They rushed inside, their faces etched with concern. The sheriff arrived shortly after, and a thorough search of the house and the surrounding area was conducted. However, no signs of an intruder were found. There were a few scuff marks on the bottom of the back door, but we couldn't remember if they had been there before. The incident remained a mystery, and to this day, we have no idea who was at the door or why. That night changed us. We never forgot to lock the doors after that, and the memory of the terror we felt lingered for years. Emily and I grew closer, our bond strengthened by the shared experience. We never spoke about it openly, but the unspoken understanding between us was clear. News of the incident spread quickly through Meadowgrove. Our neighbors were shocked and concerned, and the town's sense of security was shaken. Parents became more vigilant, and the sheriff's department increased patrols. The community rallied around us, offering support and reassurance. Despite the increased vigilance, the town never returned to its former state of innocence. The knowledge that something so terrifying could happen in their quiet town was a sobering reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the surface. Years passed, and Emily and I grew older. We moved away from Meadowgrove, pursuing our own paths in life. But the memory of that night stayed with us, a constant reminder of the fragility of safety and the importance of vigilance. Emily became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping others. I followed a different path, becoming a journalist. My experiences that night fueled my desire to uncover the truth and shed light on the darker aspects of society. Decades later, I found myself back in Meadowgrove. The town had changed, but the essence of it remained the same. I was there to write a story about the town's history and its people. As I interviewed the residents, I couldn't help but think back to that fateful night. I decided to revisit our old house, now occupied by a new family. The memories came flooding back as I stood in the common room, looking out at the backyard through the glass door. The house was different, but the feeling of unease was still there. As I delved deeper into the town's history, I discovered that our experience was not an isolated incident. There had been other unexplained occurrences over the years, each one adding to the town's lore. The manhunt for the crazed man from the new special had never been resolved, and his whereabouts remained unknown. I spent weeks researching, interviewing residents, and piecing together the fragments of the town's dark past. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that Meadowgrove held secrets that went far beyond that one night of terror. My investigation led me to a series of old newspaper clippings and police reports. I discovered that the man from the news special had ties to Meadowgrove. He had lived there briefly before moving away, and his rampage had been a chilling echo of the town's own dark history. The more I dug, the more I uncovered a pattern of violence and secrecy that had been buried for decades. The town's quiet facade hid a web of lies and cover-ups, and the truth was far more sinister than anyone had imagined. As I prepared to publish my findings, I received a visit from an unexpected source. An elderly woman, who had been a close friend of my grandmother, came to see me. She revealed that she had been keeping a secret for years, a secret that held the key to the town's dark past. She told me about a series of murders that had occurred in Meadowgrove decades ago, murders that had been covered up by the town's founding families. The man from the news special was a descendant of one of those families, and his rampage had been a twisted act of revenge. With the truth finally unveiled, I published my story. The town was shocked, and the revelation sent ripples through the community. The sheriff's department reopened old cases, and the town's dark past was brought to light. Emily and I returned to Meadowgrove one last time, standing together in the common room of our old house. The memories of that night were still fresh, but the fear had been replaced by a sense of closure. We had uncovered the truth, and the town could finally begin to heal. As we left Meadowgrove behind, we knew that the night of terror would always be a part of our story. But it was a story of resilience, of facing the darkness and emerging stronger. And in the end, that was the most important lesson of all. About 5 years ago, my mom, Linda, started dating a guy she met on a dating website. It seemed normal. I had recently begun seeing a woman who later became my wife, and we also met online. I'll call her Emily. Anyway, neither Emily nor I ever really liked this guy. We didn't think he was evil or anything, just a bit creepy. He was quiet, often kept his eyes closed, and sometimes said strange things. For instance, once he offered Emily a chocolate bar and then put one in his mouth, closed his eyes, and moaned as it melted. One day, Emily and I visited Mom, but she was suddenly called into work, leaving us to wait at her house. Her boyfriend was there too, but he spent the entire time in her bedroom with the door closed. Before Christmas, Mom and this guy started having problems. Emily and I visited her for the holidays, and she poured out all her troubles to us. We listened attentively, shared our thoughts, and advised her to break up with him. She had already made up her mind and planned to end things with him. On Christmas Eve, we spent the night at Mom's, and early the next morning, on Christmas Day, we headed to my dad's place. We hadn't planned to stay overnight, but a snowstorm hit, which turned out to be a pleasant Christmas surprise. The next day, as soon as we could drive through the snow, Emily suggested we stop by Mom's to make sure she was okay. Emily had a really bad feeling about Mom's now ex-boyfriend. Mom's car was in the driveway, but that didn't mean much because she lived close enough to work to walk, and there was no snow in her town. She also never locked her door, which always annoyed me, so we let ourselves in. That's when we saw blood dripping from the water dispenser on the fridge. It had filled the drip tray and was spreading across the floor in a pool. Emily screamed, and I was terrified. I was sure I'd find Mom's head in the freezer. Nervously, I opened the freezer and found a bag of frozen cherries that had been opened, shoved into the freezer, and fallen onto the ice dispenser, where it thawed. The relief we felt was immense but short-lived. The house was eerily silent, and something told us that all was not well. We started searching the house, and with each step, our unease grew. The living room looked normal, but there was a sense of something wrong in the air. We went upstairs to Mom's bedroom. The door was slightly open, and a faint but distinct smell wafted from the room, something between mustiness and a sickly sweet aroma. I pushed the door open, and it creaked slowly on its hinges. The room was a mess. Things were scattered as if someone had been searching for something in a hurry. On the nightstand was a photo of Mom and her ex-boyfriend, but the glass was shattered, and shards lay on the floor. Emily and I exchanged glances, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Mom?" I called out, but there was no response. We continued to search the house, checking every room and closet. In the bathroom, there was a message written in lipstick on the mirror: "He will return." My heart froze, and I realized we needed to call the police immediately. While I was on the phone with the police, Emily continued to search the house. She found an old notebook of Mom's in the kitchen drawer. It contained notes written in a shaky hand, as if Mom had been writing in a rush or under great stress. We started reading, and with each line, our concern grew. "He always says strange things. I'm afraid of him. He said he'll never let me go. That I'm his only hope." I found photos in his bag. They were pictures of other women, all with red crosses on them. "He said if I leave, he'll find me. He knows where I work, where I live. He knows everything." The last entry was made on Christmas Eve. "I've decided to break up with him. I can't live like this anymore. But I'm afraid he won't let me go so easily." The police arrived a few minutes later, and we handed them the notebook. They began searching the house, and after a while, one of the officers found a hidden compartment in the basement. It contained the photos Mom had written about and something else: old newspaper clippings about missing women. The police launched an investigation and soon discovered that Mom's ex-boyfriend was a suspect in several missing persons cases. He used dating websites to find his victims, and Mom was apparently his next target. Emily and I were in shock. We couldn't believe that Mom had been in such danger and that we hadn't noticed anything. The police continued their search, but Mom's ex-boyfriend seemed to have vanished into thin air. No traces, no leads. A few days passed, and Emily and I decided to stay with Mom to support her. She was in a terrible state, and we understood that she needed our help. We tried not to leave her alone, fearing that he might return. One night, after we had all gone to bed, I heard a strange sound. It was a soft creak, as if someone was walking around the house. I quietly got out of bed, trying not to wake Emily, and tiptoed into the hallway. The sound came again, and I realized it was coming from the living room. I slowly made my way downstairs, my heart pounding. The living room was dark, but I saw a shadow move by the window. I turned on the light, and before me was a chilling scene. Mom lay on the floor, unconscious, and her ex-boyfriend stood over her with a knife in his hand. He turned to me, and I saw madness in his eyes. I screamed, and Emily, hearing me, rushed downstairs. She screamed too, and this seemed to distract him. He dashed for the exit, and without thinking, I chased after him. We ran outside, and I saw him getting into a car. I managed to memorize the license plate before he sped off. I rushed back inside, and Emily and I tried to revive Mom. Thankfully, she was alive but in shock. The police arrived a few minutes later, and we gave them the license plate number. They began a pursuit and soon found him. He didn't resist and was arrested. Mom recovered, but the incident left a deep mark on our souls. We realized how dangerous the world could be and how important it was to be cautious about who we let into our lives. Mom stopped meeting men through dating websites, and we tried to support her in every way we could. This experience taught us a lot. We grew closer and now knew that we could always count on each other's support. Although we would never forget that terrible incident, we tried to move forward and enjoy every moment together. Several months passed since that horrifying event. Mom was gradually returning to a normal life, but the shadow of what had happened still hung over us. Emily and I tried to support her, visiting and calling often to make sure she was okay. Mom started seeing a therapist, and it seemed to help her cope with her emotions. One evening, as Emily and I were watching a movie at home, the phone rang. It was Mom. Her voice was trembling, and I immediately knew something was wrong. "Mom, what's happened?" I asked, feeling my heart race. I received a letter," she said, barely holding back tears. "It's from him." Emily and I exchanged glances, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "We'll be right there," I said and hung up. We quickly got dressed and rushed to Mom's. On the way, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. How could he have sent a letter if he was in jail? Could it be someone else? But who? When we arrived, Mom opened the door, and I could see she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. In her hands was an envelope. We entered the house, and she handed it to me. "Read it," she said, her hands shaking. I took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a sheet of paper, neatly handwritten. I began to read aloud. Dear Linda, I know you think it's all over, but it's not. I'll always be nearby, watching you. You can't hide from me. I'll return, and then we'll be together forever. With love, his name. Emily gasped, and I felt a wave of anger rise within me. How dare he? How could he write such a thing after everything he had done? We need to show this to the police, I said, trying to stay calm. They need to know he's still harassing you. Mom nodded, and Emily and I took her to the police station. The officers listened to us carefully and took the letter for analysis. They assured us they would take every measure to ensure Mom's safety. On the way back, we decided Mom couldn't stay alone. We offered for her to stay with us, and she agreed. That evening, we sat in the kitchen for a long time, discussing what had happened and trying to understand how he could have sent the letter from jail. Maybe he has an accomplice? Emily suggested. Someone helping him from the outside? Possibly, I agreed. But whoever it is, we need to be careful. The next day, we installed a security system and cameras in the house. We weren't going to risk Mom's safety. A few weeks passed, and it seemed like everything had calmed down. Mom was slowly getting back on her feet, and we hoped the worst was behind us. One morning, as I was preparing breakfast, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a police officer standing there. Good morning, he said. May I come in? I nodded and let him in. Mom and Emily came downstairs, and we all gathered in the living room. We have some news, the officer said. We found out who sent the letter. It was one of the prison guards. He confessed to helping your ex-boyfriend in exchange for money. We sighed in relief. Finally, we had answers to our questions. What will happen to him? Mom asked. He's been fired and charged, the officer replied. He won't be able to help your ex-boyfriend anymore. After the officer left, we hugged each other, feeling a heavy burden lift from our shoulders. We hoped that now it was truly over. A few more months passed. Mom moved back home, and we continued to support her, visiting and calling often. She started dating someone new, and it seemed her life was getting back on track. Emily and I also tried to move forward, never forgetting what had happened but trying not to let it overshadow our future. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch watching TV, the phone rang. It was Mom. Hi, Mom, I said, smiling. How are you? Hi, son, she replied. I'm doing well. I just wanted to say that I love you both and I'm so grateful for everything you've done for me. We love you too, Mom, I said, feeling warmth spread inside me. Remember, we're always here for you. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up. Emily smiled at me, and I knew we had made it through. We had survived this nightmare and grown stronger. Now we knew that we could always count on each other, and that was the most important thing. A few more years passed. Emily and I bought a house, and we had a child. Mom often visited us, and we spent a lot of time together. She found the strength to move forward and even started volunteering, helping women in difficult situations. One day, as we sat on the terrace drinking tea, Mom said, "You know, I often think about what happened. Sometimes it feels like it was just a bad dream. But I know it was real, and it made me stronger." You're right, Mom, I said, hugging her. We all became stronger. Emily smiled and added, and now we know that we can always count on each other. We sat there, watching the sunset, enjoying the moment and realizing how important it was to cherish every minute spent together. We had been through a lot, but it had only brought us closer and made our family stronger. And although the shadow of that terrible event sometimes returned to our thoughts, we knew we could face any challenge. Because we had the most important strength, the love and support of each other. My mother-in-law was a very funny and cool woman. She and my wife were really close, and sadly, she passed away when our son was about 4 months old. Flash forward a few years. We live in an old 1930s-era craftsman house in Pasadena, California. Our son is about 3 at the time. I was giving him a bath one night, and he starts looking over my shoulder, not at random stuff, but at something specific. A moment passes, and he asks me why Grandma calls Mommy a funny name. Long pause. I asked him what he meant, thinking he was talking about my mom. He then says, "Why does Grandma call Mommy?" My mother-in-law's nickname for my wife. I was really set back by this. My wife and I never used the nickname, it was just what her mom called her since she was a baby. I asked him where he heard that. His reply: "The farmer told me." I asked him who the farmer was, and he replied, "His friend." I tell my wife this story later, and she's of course reduced to tears over the whole nickname thing. We both know there is no way for him to know this, and we just kinda marvel at it. Flash forward to the next weekend, and my son is playing in his room. My wife is at work, retail, and I'm home. I worked Monday through Friday. I hear him start talking like he's having a conversation. He's saying things like yes, no, I don't know that, then some laughing. I go into his room and ask him what he's doing, and he says playing. I ask with whom. He says, the farmer. At this point, I'm already thinking about the fucking Exorcist movie and Captain Howdy. It's a little unsettling. I ask him where the farmer is. He says he left when I came in. The fuck? So my wife gets home, and I tell her this, and now she's just as weirded out as I am. We have no idea what to do and figure if it happens again, we'll do something. A few days later, in the middle of the night, we both overhear our son saying the following: "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore." Wife and I go check on him, both of us a little freaked. He's just sitting up in bed. I ask if he's okay, and he says, "Yeah, Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore." He never once mentioned the farmer again. Not ever. He's 13 now and doesn't remember any of it. We do, though. The incident with our son and the farmer left a lingering unease in our household. We tried to brush it off as a child's imagination, but the specificity of the nickname my mother-in-law used for my wife was too precise to ignore. It gnawed at us, a constant reminder that something unexplained had happened. As the years passed, our son grew into a typical, rambunctious boy. He loved playing outside, exploring the backyard, and climbing the old oak tree that stood sentinel over our property. Life seemed to return to normal, but the memory of the farmer never truly faded. One evening, as I was tucking our son into bed, he looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. "Dad, do you think Grandma is still here?" he asked. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean, buddy?" "I mean, do you think she's still watching over us?" he clarified. I smiled and ruffled his hair. "I think she's always watching over us, just like she promised she would." He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and snuggled down into his blankets. As I turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his question than simple childhood curiosity. A few weeks later, my wife decided to go through some old family photographs. She had inherited a box of them from her mother, and they had been gathering dust in the attic for years. As she spread them out on the kitchen table, I joined her, intrigued by the glimpses into her past. There were pictures of my wife as a baby, her mother holding her with a radiant smile. There were snapshots of family vacations, birthdays, and holidays. And then, tucked away at the bottom of the box, was a photograph that made my wife gasp. It was a picture of my mother-in-law as a young woman, standing next to a man in overalls and a straw hat. The man had a kind face, weathered by the sun, and he was smiling at the camera. Behind them was a farm, complete with a barn and fields stretching out into the distance. "Who is that?" I asked, pointing to the man. My wife looked at the photograph, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I have no idea," she whispered. "I've never seen this picture before." We turned the photograph over, hoping for a clue. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "Me and the Farmer, 1965. A chill ran down my spine. The Farmer. The same name our son had used all those years ago. I looked at my wife, and I could see the same fear reflected in her eyes. Determined to find out more, we decided to visit my wife's aunt, her mother's sister. Aunt Linda lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a garden filled with flowers and herbs. She welcomed us warmly, inviting us in for tea and cookies. As we sat in her cozy living room, we showed her the photograph. Aunt Linda's eyes widened in recognition. "Oh, that's your mother and old Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "He was a dear friend of the family." "Who is he?" my wife asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Aunt Linda smiled sadly. "He was a farmer who lived down the road from us. He was always so kind to your mother. They were inseparable as children, always getting into mischief together. But then, when they were teenagers, something happened." She paused, her eyes clouding over with memory. "There was an accident. Mr. Thompson was badly injured, and he passed away shortly after. Your mother was devastated. She never really talked about it, but I know it haunted her for the rest of her life." My wife and I exchanged a glance. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture was far from complete. Aunt Linda gave us directions to the old Thompson farmhouse. It had been abandoned for years, left to decay and crumble. As we drove down the winding country road, the house came into view, a stark silhouette against the setting sun. We parked the car and made our way up the overgrown path. The house was in a state of disrepair, the paint peeling and the roof sagging. But there was an eerie beauty to it, a sense of history and secrets waiting to be uncovered. As we stepped inside, the floorboards creaked beneath our feet. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of old wood. We explored the house, room by room, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls. In the upstairs bedroom, we found a small wooden chest tucked away in the corner. It was locked, but the key was still in the keyhole. With a sense of trepidation, we opened it. Inside were letters, yellowed with age, and a small leather-bound journal. The letters were addressed to my mother-in-law, signed with love from the farmer. The journal belonged to Mr. Thompson, filled with his thoughts and dreams, his love for my mother-in-law evident on every page. We spent hours poring over the letters and the journal, piecing together the story of my mother-in-law and the farmer. They had been more than just friends, they had been in love. But their love was forbidden, their families disapproving of the match. The accident that had taken Mr. Thompson's life had been a tragic twist of fate. He had been trying to save my mother-in-law from a runaway horse, and in the process, he had been thrown and fatally injured. My mother-in-law had blamed herself for his death, carrying the guilt with her for the rest of her life. As we read the final pages of the journal, we understood the depth of their love and the pain of their loss. It was a story of love and tragedy, of secrets and regrets. And it explained why my mother-in-law had never spoken of the farmer, why she had kept his memory locked away in her heart. We returned to the old farmhouse one last time, armed with the knowledge of the past. As we stood in the overgrown garden, we could almost feel the presence of my mother-in-law and the farmer, their spirits intertwined in a dance of love and loss. My wife took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I know you're here," she whispered. "I know you've been watching over us, over our son. And I know you've been trying to tell us something." She paused, her voice trembling. "I understand now. I understand your pain, your love, your loss. And I want you to know that it's okay. It's okay to let go. It's okay to find peace." As she spoke, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and we could swear we heard a soft whisper, a final goodbye. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the breeze died down, and the garden was still once more. In the days that followed, our house felt lighter, the air clearer. The unease that had lingered for so long seemed to have lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. Our son, now a teenager, seemed happier, more carefree, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders as well. We never spoke of the farmer again, but we knew that he and my mother-in-law were finally at rest, their love story complete. And as we looked to the future, we knew that their love would live on in our hearts, a testament to the power of love and the enduring bond between a mother and her child. And so, our story came full circle, a tale of love and loss, of secrets and revelations. It was a story that would stay with us forever, a reminder of the power of the past and the promise of the future. And as we looked at our son, now a young man on the cusp of adulthood, we knew that he too would carry a piece of that story with him, a legacy of love and resilience that would guide him through the challenges and triumphs of life.